Great. So welcome to the 2026 CC Days Peace Pod training. I will be presenting Scott and Tanvi. So we will be going through our asks in the report, but just a brief background on what we're working with on the budget here. And this graph is in the report. It's so striking that blue line, these massive increases. So specifically, the Department of Energy budget for proposed for FY 2027 is $53.9 billion. The NNSA is the National Nuclear Security Administration. That is a semi-autonomous branch of the Department of Energy. And this is where we work in. The Department of Energy controls nuclear weapons materials. So the NNSA is part of that, and this is what we are talking to Congress about, or these agencies, the Department of Energy and NNSA. So the Department of Energy really is, the Department of Nuclear Weapons for our purposes. 61% of that $53.9 billion DOE budget is for NNSA. And then in terms of base military spending for FY 2027, there is that $1.5 trillion that you have probably seen in the news. 1.1 trillion of that is base funding for the Department of War. And there's an additional $350 million through budget reconciliation. So some important items, facts from this budget. The Office of Science was cut by $1.1 billion, 13%. That's huge. In their words, eliminates funding for climate change and green use and research. The cleanup budget for environmental management and nuclear waste remediation and cleanup, nationwide cleanup of legacy Cold War radioactive and toxic waste at DOE sites, that was also cut 5% cut by $386 million, 5%. And then as well, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy has been eliminated entirely. So these are our asks that we'll be going through, and these are all of our asks for Peace Pod: stop new warheads, stop new bomb plants, support rule of law and nuclear disarmament, and no to nuclear testing. So a bit of background. This is a, as I mentioned, massive increase across the board. So escalating the funding for multiple new warheads and plutonium pit production carries financial and technical risks, intensifies nuclear dangers, and adds fuel to the fire of a spiraling global nuclear arms race. The cost for U.S. nuclear weapons modernization is nearly $2 trillion and growing. This is paired with stagnant funding toward defense nuclear non-proliferation, and it illustrates really our priorities are backwards here. We need to reassess these spending priorities and realign funding for actual human and social needs. So talks of resumption of nuclear testing as well, again, add to this global arms race. New START expired earlier this year in February, and the threat of a worsening arms race is becoming reality. The US and Russia still hold 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. Bilateral and multilateral diplomacy must be soberly considered and creatively centered in our actions. And the US and other nuclear weapon states have failed to comply with Article 6 of the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty. The entry into force in 2021 of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons challenges nuclear weapon states and their allies to disarm, and challenges states to re-examine the role
think Sophie outlined a great kind of overarching theme of the situation that we have right now, and also you just came from the Green Pod, where you heard about the attack on environmental laws and on the regulations around exposures to radiation, both by the public and the workers at these sites. When you mix that with these huge budgets, bigger than any Cold War budget, even when adjusted for inflation, a whole slew of new nuclear warheads, a whole replacement of our delivery vehicles for those warheads, and a complete degradation of international agreements that control the number and types of warheads that can exist, so that we now have none at all. It's creating a picture that is of a major new nuclear arms race and full-scale preparation for nuclear war. So that's what we're going into these offices with this year. I've been doing this for like 17 years now, and it's the worst it's been when you put all of these elements together. So I'm going to specifically talk about some of the warheads that we chose to focus on, and it's a lot of them. You do not need to know all of this through and through. I'm just trying to create a picture and also know that this is not all of them that we're currently working on. We didn't decide to focus on some that are so far through their life extension program or their development that it's kind of too late to challenge them. But these are the ones that we think are really ripe to still get Congress to change course on. So the first, they're in a particular order. The first two also apply to new plutonium pit production. So the first two weapons I'm going to talk about are the drivers for new plutonium pit production. And we've got to save questions till the end unless there's not going to be a whole thing on plutonium pit production. But it just means that these are new design weapons where the physics package, which is the part made up of plutonium and uranium, the part that goes boom, is substantially a different design than what we've done before, what we've tested, and what we have in storage. So instead of reusing those pits, the agency says we need to have all new versions of those physics packages and build factories to build those in. And the first one to talk about is the biggest single program at the NNSA, the Sentinel Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, which is the ground-based strategic deterrent. It's those warheads located in silos across 5 states in the American West. And it has an all-new warhead, the W87-1, that is being developed by Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is the lead lab. That warhead is also driving increased plutonium or enhanced plutonium utilization at that site, so you can mention that if you're in a California meeting. All of these numbers are for the budget request for fiscal year 2027. There's various kind of versions of the budget because there's the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee that's gone over the budget, and they have different numbers. So if you mention these numbers, you want to say it's from the fiscal year 2027 budget request, which for this particular weapon allocates $913 million, and we're asking for that to be cut. It's a major increase. We want it to be cut because this weapon is particularly proliferation provocative, and while we're planning to replace every intercontinental ballistic missile, we're also planning to do, by we I mean the federal government, to sustain the existing warheads, the Minuteman III and their W87-0, well into the 2030s. So if we're already creating that time frame for extending the existing ones, let's slow it down and debate whether we really even need intercontinental ballistic missiles, and cut the funding for the next version of the program until we truly have that debate. We could save billions of dollars, and if we're going ahead with that anyway, now's the time to cut it and change course, which would also change course on plutonium pit production. And by the way, these asks are on the ask sheet. This is just a little more detail, but you can follow along there. Next is the W-93 warhead for the submarine-launched ballistic missile. The W-93 warhead is the main driver for plutonium pit production that will take place at the Savannah River site. I forgot to mention that the W-87-1 for the Sentinel will drive production at Los Alamos National Labs plutonium pit production site, or PF4, for the first 10 years, or the next 10 years of plutonium pit production at Los Alamos. The W-93 for the submarine-launched ballistic missile will drive production at Savannah River site for the first decade or so of production there. And that warhead is redundant of two existing submarine-launched ballistic missiles and warheads for ballistic missiles that are already in the stockpile and in fact recently went through life extension. So we already spent money on two similar warheads to extend their life. What's special about the W-93 is it's also the warhead that's planned for the UK to use on their submarines. So we're basically designing a new warhead for the UK to use. We'll put it in our stockpile too, but it will be redundant of capacity we already have in our stockpile. So the main driver is this UK program, a bad reason to be doing all of this work. It is for the Columbia-class submarines, which is the bigger class of submarines that we already have nuclear weapons for. That is relevant because the other weapon that we're talking about here is the W-80-5. It's a warhead that will sit on the new Sea-Launched Cruise Missile, which will be for attack submarines, which is a smaller class of submarine that we currently don't arm with nuclear missiles. They have their own bases, so it also means putting nuclear weapons at new Navy bases, and it's particularly proliferation provocative because our adversaries won't know if the cruise missile launched by an attack submarine is conventional or nuclear. And it's referred to as the SLCM, the SLCM, the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile. The W-80 is also being developed by Livermore Lab, so it's particularly relevant if you have a California meeting. And so far, there's no master schedule or lifetime cost estimate. So when we talk about that one, we can argue that's another reason why Congress should put funding on hold until we have an understanding of the lifetime cost and the schedule for this weapon. So those were the submarine launch missiles. The first ones were the ground-based. Now I'm going to talk about the airplane-launched warheads. The B-83 bomb is one that's already in the stockpile and that in 2024 was put on a schedule to be retired, but then the Trump administration took it out of that process and instead decided to quote-unquote sustain and retain it. It's a very high-yield nuclear weapon, and we argue that it should be put back into retirement and dismantled. And it's known as a bunker buster. It's a drop weapon that's designed to reach deep geological sites and destroy them, but it's redundant of other capacity. We created the B-6112, which is a bunker buster. We're also creating the B-6113, also a bunker buster. I'm going to talk about another bunker buster we're developing. So we're developing all these redundant warhead and weapon systems at the same time without congressional oversight, without deep thought about this, and so we're arguing we should cut the B-6113 as well until there's more, again, cost estimates and schedules for it. There's $46 million for a feasibility study. It's in the early stages, which means it's ripe for reconsideration. We haven't devoted huge sums of money to this one yet. Though the projection is to spend $1 billion on it in 2028, let's not get there. Stop this funding and before it's too late. It's also redundant of the long-range standoff warhead. We're not talking about that one. It's too far down the road to do. We decided not to focus on it because it's kind of unrealistic to cut it at this point. But this B-6113 is redundant of that long-range standoff warhead. So let's cancel it. There's a new budget line that's very vague in the budget. That's for about $100 million for future warhead programs and the feasibility studies. However, as I said, there's really little detail. It's clear that some of it will go to yet another bunker buster warhead plan called the Nuclear Deterrent System Air Delivered, which has already received $96 million in the last total in the last 2 years. We don't need yet another bunker buster system. There needs to be clear detail for Congress about what this funding is for. For example, what aircraft it will be integrated into operationally, the scope, purpose, and need, and estimates before they start giving money to it and are just calling it future programs. So again, it's putting the cart before the horse. It's putting funding before Congress even understands what that funding is for. I don't think Congress likes that kind of thing, so it's a good one to call out and have them cut. All right, now I'm going to switch back to Sophie's on the back.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about this section, Stop New Bomb Plants, which includes the plutonium modernization, plutonium production expansion program that Scott mentioned. So just going through these quickly, cut funding for National Nuclear Security Administration's plutonium modernization, require credible cost estimates and the completion of the court-ordered PEIS, Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, before NNSA aggressively pursues expanded plutonium pit production, restrain the expansion of tritium production, cut funding for the Kansas City National Security Complex, require NNSA and DOE to improve its cost growth notification process. Congress should demand a full accounting of cost overruns of the uranium processing facility. So, plutonium pit. What is a plutonium pit? It is, as you can see in the graphic, the core of the nuclear weapon. A plutonium pit is what was in the nuclear bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. In 1989, an FBI raid stopped industrial-scale pit production at the Rocky Flats plant near Denver. This site was extremely environmentally contaminated, and they unlawfully, and they eventually got shut down because of that in 1989. So after that, plutonium pit production was transferred to the Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico. And they have had pit production capability since, I believe, 2006, but they transferred pit production to Los Alamos in 1996, and then eventually started producing pits again to kind of try to finish up this production run from Rocky Flats. But when they started pit production at Los Alamos, that was originally capped at 20 pits per year. They've not gotten anywhere close to that in the past. However, the government now is planning to produce over 30 pits per year at Los Alamos and over at least 50 pits per year at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. I mentioned Los Alamos has had pit production capability for a while. The Savannah River site in South Carolina has never produced plutonium pits. This would be an entirely new mission for this site. A couple issues which I will expand on. Plutonium pits last at least a century. The U.S. has 15 to 20,000 existing pits already in storage at the Pantex plant in Texas. This expansion, this future plutonium pit production, these new pits are not to maintain the safety and reliability of our current nuclear weapons stockpile. These are for new design nuclear weapons that Scott just talked about, for example. More, but the W87-1 and W93 are these new design nuclear weapons that use new plutonium pits. And this is for the new nuclear arms. So again, just really drilling down on this point, all future pit production is for speculative new designs. These new designs, these new weapons can't be tested because of the international testing moratorium, which we want to maintain. However, these new designs could prompt the U.S. to resume nuclear explosive testing, which would have severe proliferation consequences. In 2006, independent experts concluded that pits last at least 85 years. Their average age is now 43. And this is not on the slide, but this is a new development. Ask JR for more details. There is an independent group of scientists, experts called the Jasons, and they have done a report on pit aging. That report, we're very interested in seeing that. It has been released to Congress. We don't get to see it yet. It's not publicly available yet to us. So we are hoping in your meetings you can ask Congress to help us to produce a unclassified summary so that we can see the results of this pit aging study, because experts from the Union of Concerned Scientists, for example, have confirmed that pit aging is not a reasonable concern to do this massive plutonium expansion program at this time. So just note that, again, we'll ask JRI for more details, but that's going to be an ask to get that unclassified summary released for the Jason pit aging report. So I mentioned up to 20,000 existing pits are already stored at the Pantex plant in Texas. Pit production is extremely expensive. The NNSA plans on spending $5 billion in each of the next 6 years, and that total is $60 billion over the next 20 years. It will be more than that, even. NNSA has no credible cost estimates or an integrated master schedule for nuclear production. The SRS pit plant is slated to cost more than $30 billion, making it potentially the most expensive building in U.S. history. As I said, they've never done pit production at the site. They're refurbishing this MOX facility that has already sunk, I think, 5 to 6 billion at that site. So this is an incredibly expensive endeavor. And there is no cost estimates. So NNSA should have credible cost estimates and schedules and complete the court-ordered programmatic environmental impact statement before aggressively expanding plutonium production. What is the programmatic environmental impact statement, PEIS? So this is a document that we are in the process of looking at and working on and commenting on now. The NNSA violated the National Environmental Policy Act by not doing a environmental impact statement, programmatic environmental impact statement. They did not do this when they started these plans for pit production. The number 30 at Los Alamos, 50 at Savannah River site. They started on these plans and didn't do any sort of environmental analysis, and we actually sued the NNSA on that and won. The Nuke Watch, Tri-Valley Cares, Savannah River Site Watch, and the Golden Beach Sea Island Coalition down in South Carolina. So that is a really big victory. We won that case back in 2024. There was a scoping process for that document last year. The draft PEIS has been released, and that is now open for public comment until July 16, 2026. Members of Congress, federal and state regulators, and concerned federal employees should submit comments in opposition to the NNSA's current plan. Funding for plutonium modernization should be cut until the PEIS reaches a record of decision. As I said, this comment process for the draft ends July 16th, and then a record of decision we expect next year sometime. But this funding needs to be cut entirely until that point, and also until credible cost estimates and schedules for plutonium production have been completed. And we have a fact sheet on expanding plutonium production with all this and more in the back there. Please feel free to grab one of those. Please.
There's also a new development. We got together with Senator Markey, who got us a room to have a congressional briefing on Thursday, the 4th, this Thursday. So some of the ANA members are going to host that in the Senate building. So if you have a meeting with a senator this week, you can invite them to attend. We'll be printing out some invitations that you can hand out and have those available for your meetings. And for you guys to come, it's at 3 o'clock on Thursday.
And Scott, when are we going to have them so people can take half a dozen for their...
I'm hoping by end of day, our printer doesn't work, so we're triaging what we're going to do about printing today.
Okay, all right. See the tall guy.
Cross your fingers that we figure it out.
That's a great thing to try to get senators to press. Moving on, restrain the expansion of tritium production. Tritium is used to boost the destructive power of nuclear weapons. You can see in that graph up there, it gets kind of injected into the plutonium core. And the funding for tritium operations has been massively increased by 69% to $880 million in FY 2027. So that's already a huge increase from previous years. After that, in 2028, it more than doubled to $1.8 billion. So we really need to fight this and call out how this is exactly a measure of the U.S.'s aggressive nuclear arms buildup. Cut funding for the Kansas City National Security Complex. Kansas City National Security Complex is key to the new nuclear arms race. It supplies 80% of the components for nuclear weapons. I think in the past they produced around 100,000 parts for nuclear weapons. That is jumping to like 300,000 parts for nuclear weapons that they're currently producing. So that's a massive, massive jump. You can also see it in this budget increase. It's a 64% jump in 2 years. The current budget is $2.2 billion. This is for life extension programs that Scott mentioned that give warheads new military capabilities. It is also for future new design of nuclear weapons. I know it's a little bit hard to see this here, but future air-delivered warhead, FAW, future strategic sea-based warhead, FSW, future strategic land-based warhead, FSLW. As on top of the weapons that Scott mentioned that you can see the W87-1 here in 2020s and then the W93 here in the future. But even beyond that, you can see that they're planning to produce more and more and more. And these are just proposed, undetailed future massive nuclear weapons buildups, redundant and unnecessary, and massively expensive. But I will pass it to Scott again.
So not only, as you represent ANA in your meetings, can you bring up the amazing lawsuit that ANA groups won, we have another victory. If you've been here for the last couple of years, we've gone to Congress to ask that the cost estimating process at NNSA be improved to match the process at the Department of Defense or Department of War. The Sentinel weapon went through a Nunn-McCurdy breach, which means at the DoD it violated the cost. It went so far over budget they had to go through a complicated reporting process to DoD and rescale that program. But there wasn't a similar process to that at NNSA. And so we have been going to Congress asking for that, and what we got Congress to do is order the Government Accountability Office to do an analysis of the cost reporting practices at NNSA, which they did, and they completed and released at the end of 2025. And it made recommendations for improving that process at NNSA, recommendations that Congress should enact to improve the process, and called out specifically the uranium processing facility for violating the existing rules as an example of why we need to improve the process. So I have a handout if you want to talk about this in your meetings, but I want to talk about the uranium processing facility as the example because that is still under construction. It was, the last cost estimate given to Congress was that it would cost $6.5 billion, but to date, Congress has already approved $10.4 billion in construction costs for that facility, yet the NNSA never went back to Congress to report they were going over 6.4. So Congress doesn't even have an accurate estimate of why it's going so far over budget, yet they still keep giving it more money. And that violates the process. The purpose here is that NNSA consistently underestimates the initial estimates when they go to Congress for a new program. And then once the program is started, they start escalating the costs, and they probably, had they done a more accurate cost estimate at the beginning, would have known. But then it becomes too late for Congress to do much about the scope and cost of the program. And they need to have a formal way to do that, which this cost estimating process provides. It will make the agency report to Congress, and then Congress can rescope the program. They can cut it, they can just make the agency do something different and save money and maybe limit the scope of the program. So that's what we are asking for here. And we need to go to meetings now and ask Congress to follow up on this report. So if you're more interested in this, I have a handout about the GAO report, and I can talk to you more about the details. And now it's on.
I'm going to go into our rule of law and nuclear disarmament act. So these are our three. Our first one is that the U.S. should adhere to New START's numerical cap on strategic warheads and delivery vehicles while pursuing negotiations for a new arms control treaty with meaningful reductions. So we mentioned this a bit briefly in the beginning, but the new strategic arms reduction treaty, or New START, was the last remaining arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia. And this limited the numerical amounts of nuclear arms. This expired in February of this year. So this is the first time in over 35 years the U.S. and Russia don't have any numerical caps on nuclear arms, which is pretty scary since both countries can now rapidly increase their stockpiles and escalate a new nuclear arms race. Russia did invite the U.S. to join them in maintaining the numerical caps on this treaty for an additional year. The U.S. has not accepted their offer. We think the U.S. should do so, because it gives an extra year to pursue negotiations for a follow-on treaty. So it just gives us that buffer time. And this is the fact that you can take to Congress. 87% of voters believe the U.S. should accept Russia's offer. This shows that this has bipartisan support. It's not just Democrats who believe this. Both parties believe that. So that's just one strong statistic that you can take to Congress. This is a pretty recent poll as well. This is from January of this year from Rethink Media and the Nuclear Threat Initiative. So we strongly believe that Congress should facilitate diplomacy and not Russian arms. Second is that the U.S. should support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Before I start talking about the TPNW, I want to talk a bit about the framework and how we got to this ask, which is the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, which
just had its 5-year review conference, so it's one thing that's being talked about on the Hill right now, so it's pretty timely. The NPT was created to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and technology to non-nuclear states, and it also called for nuclear states to pursue disarmament. And there's an article, it's Article 6, that mandates negotiations for this disarmament. The U.S. has signed the treaty, but has failed to fulfill its obligations to pursue disarmament. But the treaty isn't very specific. It doesn't include detailed provisions on how and when disarmament should occur, so it's left pretty vague. Like I said, it just had its 5-year review conference, in which no consensus document was reached, even after a month of negotiations, due to disagreement between the U.S. and Iran. And there has not been a consensus document for the past 3 review conferences. So it kind of just points to something is not working with this treaty. And that brings me to the TPNW. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was created as a response to the failure of the NPT. And it 122 countries voted to adopt this treaty in 2017, and it entered into force in 2021. The treaty is significant because under international law, it makes all facets of nuclear weapons illegal. So whether that be manufacturing, possessing, transferring, threatening to use, etc., all facets of nuclear weapons are now illegal under international law. As of 2026, 95 countries have signed on, and 74 have taken it one step further and ratified the treaty. They're known as states parties. However, no nuclear weapon states have done so. So we believe the U.S. should support the treaty and be a leader for other nuclear weapon states to follow. Our last ask under this section is to pass House Resolution 317 and Senate Resolution 323 to lead the world back from the brink of nuclear war. These resolutions make nuclear disarmament the centerpiece of national security policy of the U.S. These resolutions call on the U.S. to lead the world back from the brink of nuclear war and halt and reverse the nuclear arms race. Currently, we're in a scary situation where the president has the sole authority to launch a nuclear attack. These resolutions seek to change this by implementing effective checks and balances on the commander-in-chief's sole authority to do this. They also preserve the moratorium on nuclear testing and protect radiation-impacted communities and workers. And they also lay out plans for a just economic transition for the civilian military workforce involved in weapons production, and also communities that are economically dependent on nuclear weapons labs. These calls tie into ANA's other acts, making HRES 317 and SRES 323 a pretty comprehensive nuclear disarmament effort. So we ask that if you're meeting with congressmen, we ask that they co-sponsor HRES 317 and senators co-sponsor 323. On that table back there, where I'm sitting, we have a list of co-sponsors. So if your rep or senator has already co-sponsored, we ask that you thank them for this. And you can also see a list on congress.gov and search in these resolutions. And text of them will show up and co-sponsors, etc. That brings me to our last topic, which is no nuclear testing. We ask to reject calls to resume explosive nuclear testing at any yield and to pass the Restraint Act and the No Nuclear Testing Act. A little bit of background on nuclear testing. Since 1992, the U.S. has refrained from conducting explosive nuclear tests, maintaining a moratorium. In 1996, the U.S. signed but never ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty idea that because of other countries' nuclear testing programs, he wants the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. The statement is very vague and continues to be very vague. No one really knows what he meant by this, what kind of test he was talking about, what equal basis is, since other countries don't conduct explosive tests as well. So again, it's all very vague. And a resumption of nuclear testing poses very grave human environmental threats caused by radioactive materials in the air, the groundwater, and resumption of testing could also disrupt global security, promoting other countries to test their nuclear weapons as well. So it's all very scary. And there's been statements from NNSA officials that there is no need to resume explosive nuclear testing, and directors of national labs have said this as well. So the government also has not analyzed the environmental impacts as required under the National Environmental Policy Act, and 72% of voters in Nevada don't want testing to resume. So we ask that if you meet with congressmen, you ask them to co-sponsor the Restraint Act, which was introduced by Representative Titus of Nevada, and this amends the U.S. Code to insert a prohibition of explosive nuclear testing while also simultaneously preventing any funding from going toward the Trump administration's effort to conduct explosive nuclear tests. And there's a similar Senate bill. If you're meeting with senators, and that's Senate Bill 3090, the No Nuclear Testing Act of 2025, which was introduced by Senator Markey, and that prohibits the use of funds for explosive nuclear tests. Once again, if you want to see the list of co-sponsors, they're printed out in our co-sponsor packet on that table, or you can go to congress.gov again. And that is it for our asks. And if anyone has any questions, we can take them now. We all just did so well.
That is true. But something I'm sure went by way too fast. And so this is a chance just to ask about that.
I can add that the sheet here with the co-sponsors, it has co-sponsors for 323 and the Senate bill, and then also for the Restraint Act and the Senate version. And it's on this table. A lot of people in this room have done a lot of really good work on House Resolution 317. I believe there's more than 50 co-sponsors now. Is that right, Bailey?
Yes, if you include McGovern, there's 58 co-sponsors, which is the most of any recent nuclear-related resolution. And also one thing to add is that HRS 317 and SRS 323, we're using it more as an organizing vehicle rather than something we are asking Congress to pass. We're using it to see who our leaders are in Congress, folks that we can go to ask for these specific asks, these PC Day asks, and see who will, step up and talk about nuclear weapons in the future. And we're using it as an organizing vehicle to have constituents, everyday people who don't really normally talk about nuclear weapons, have a platform for them to speak to their elected officials and be able to voice their concerns. And so that's pretty much what we've been doing with these resolutions.
I love that framing. So if you already co-sponsored House Resolution 317, we thank you. And part of it says that you want to stop modernizing nuclear weapons. Well, we have some more really specific ways you can take action on that. It's a 2-year resolution, so this is the second year. But we're doing a final push for more co-sponsors of that. So do look and see if who you're meeting with has, or see if they have not sponsored it yet, and make that request.
And I would ask them to also sign the new bill or help to introduce the new bill next session so that it continues.
Yeah, good point, Helen.
I have a question about Markey's Nuclear Testing Act of 2025. Was that introduced as a 2-year bill, so it's the same number in 2026?
It's still listed as the same number.
Okay, then that answers the question. So the number, we can still just use that number to help people to co-sponsor it. Excellent, thank you.
What is the temperature in DC right now about these?
Yeah, we're gonna have kind of a session on that later today. There's a lot going on the Hill with War in Iran and other, more powers resolution. So a lot, unless they're on the Armed Services Committee or the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee, those members of Congress probably aren't paying a lot of attention to these issues right now, so it's kind of our job to bring that to them. If they are on one of those committees, we are smack dab in the middle of the budget processes. So they are very focused on the nuances if they're on one of those committees. So it kind of depends who you're meeting with. Some, it might be all new information, others it might be like, yeah, I know all of this, give it all to me. So you kind of need to have, your team leader should have the temperature of the specific person you're meeting with and where they are on it.
I just have a curiosity question, because I didn't realize that they had changed, or they're trying to change the design of the plutonium pits. I just thought they were trying to make more of them. What is the deal with the design change? And I don't know if, maybe this isn't important for the meeting, but I'm just curious if there's time.
Yeah, Jay?
The short answer is we don't know. We do know they inject tritium, into the pits. We do know that they changed the design of the tritium injection. There's also 3 more warheads. Every time they do it, circumstantial evidence indicates that they're changing the pit's design more and more. But it is, of course, classified.
But, a simpler, another way to understand it, which complements what Jay said, is that they're now beginning to design nuclear weapons that have all new components. The first one is the W87-1, the next one the W93, and because they're all new components, because they have, which includes the PET, and because they're giving them new capabilities, as you heard, then it is their choice to design something new in the pit, to require the production of new pits. It is their choice to make that change in the pits, to require the production of new pits. They could constrain the design of the warhead to use existing pits.
And one last short thing, Rodney Flats did ROT manufacturing, which is W-R-A-U-G-H-T, like a blacksmith. Livermore has now instituted to be done at Los Alamos casting instead. Now they're still going to machine it and everything, but my point is the actual production process is different now as well.
Thank you.
And wouldn't it be right to say that a new pit really amounts to a different geometry, a different size to some extent?
Potentially.
I mean, it's like a lump of plutonium. They're not, adding new other elements to it or anything. It's about shape and geometry.
And size and just to imagine, I have pictures of this, but just to imagine how hazardous these things are for a moment, to take it out of the technical and the budget. What you use in that Livermore developed that's going to happen at Los Alamos is it's a tilt pour furnace. You heat it and you pour it into a mold. Imagine doing that all day, every day, the hazards. And then there's transportation hazards that are gonna happen with new pit production between most of the sites that we all specifically care about. And you can ask any of us more about that. But just imagine heating it until it's molten, the most radioactive hazardous element, man-made design, in a nuclear reactor, and then they pour it into a mold. I mean, we've all done baking. We all can visualize that.
Ellen?
For the people who are new to this, how many nuclear weapons do we have right now, and how many will we have if we don't have a new agreement with Russia?
So currently we are observing, we say we're observing the limits of New START for the time being, but there's no requirement we continue to do so. And that requires a cap of 1,550 strategically deployed nuclear weapons, which is approximately how many we have. But then we also have strategically deployed, but then we also have a reserve stockpile of several thousand that are not strategically deployed. They're sitting there all ready to go if we wanted to put them on a delivery vehicle, but they're not on a delivery vehicle.
So would any of these be replaced by these new designs?
Eventually, just about all of them will be replaced by new designs or go through a life extension program, which adds new components and capabilities to them. And, if we can work, what is likely is there will start being negotiation points with Russia where we might start adding more weapons as a threat or threatening to do so, as they might do. Yes, Sophie?
I have a question I probably should have known. These new capabilities, like what, it's my understanding that they're not increasing the yields of these new designs, but what is accuracy in delivery, or is it high yield? I know one of them is high yield.
It's a lot of quote-unquote smart bomb technologies, so they can be remotely guided. Thanks, Carlos. It's different dial yield capabilities so that they can, on the weapon, decide what the yield will be if it's being used.
Yeah, I would add, the new weapons are being retrofitted with new arming, firing, and fusing sets. And I'm going to keep myself from being too wonky, but nuclear targeting happens in 3 dimensions, not 2. The burst of height is really important. So these new fuses give a new, more specific, more accurate accuracy in 3 dimensions. And that is what is changing the lethality of the weapons. Or it's the biggest single thing.
And what does that mean? The lethality?
It doesn't necessarily mean a bigger weapon. They're simply more accurate.
More efficient.
Yeah,
Kill more
that's the
people
key
with
thing.
this,
Yeah,
than
you
you
kill
kill
more people
with
efficiently.
the same yield.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily.
It can be.
In a certain sense, smaller weapons are more dangerous, more likely to be used. But again, it's about increased accuracy.
Well, I hope some folks can come to
The
our...
wisdom of the back of the room is keep the cycle going, keep the boys funded doing new things, keep the corporate profits flowing. We'll leave that as the, Kelly?
Yeah, I have a question. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my memory was when New START was passed, part of the ratification was we're going to modernize nuclear weapons, right? And that was the trade-off of like, we get this passed and we're going to modernize. And so is all of this coming out of that modernization that was agreed to then, or did Trump give like another bump to this, or is it all part of that same process?
Yes and yes. My sense was that initial push for modernization was focused on life extending the existing stockpile. These newly designed warheads is kind of postdates that initial push, but has been rubber stamped by the Biden administration to move forward and the Trump administration as well. So, kind of shifted from modernizing the existing stockpile to brand new warheads as we progressed, but that was the start. But art is part of what you're getting to also, that art, should we worry about a follow-on treaty to New START or some other international treaty resulting in another kind of deal to further these modernization efforts? And yes, we should worry about that, although it's hard to imagine we could do more. And my sense at Livermore Lab and at Los Alamos, I've heard, is that they are way extended with how much they already have on their plate. It's hard to imagine that they can't even accomplish the things they are being given in any reasonable time frame, like the time frames that are being talked about, let alone do any more. But they might find a way if there's more money.
I mean, I was trying to come up with, like, is there a Republican argument of like, this is Obama and Biden's thing, but really I feel like they would probably just say, yeah, we should do more, and they wanted, I don't know. Just trying to-
Yes, and it's in Project 2025 and to keep doing more. And they're very happy with the deregulation happening and with the,
So bipartisan support.
yeah. Yes.
And I have one more question, and that is about the contractors who are making these nuclear weapons. Can you list them?
There are many contractors involved. I can talk about some of them at the labs, but feel free if you know others. So there's Bechtel Corporation and Battelle and BWX Technologies, and then perhaps most disturbingly, there's some universities involved, Texas A&M at Los Alamos and the University of California at both sites.
Lockheed's a biggie. It's all the usual suspects.
Well, it's good to name them if you would, please, just for recording.
That's the list we got.
Raytheon, is Raytheon involved?
Raytheon's mainly involved on the delivery vehicle side more than the warhead side.
To be fair, what you have here are people who are quite expert at their own sites and have additional expertise, but to ask people without research to name an entire list is a recipe for making an accidental error, and so, I'm going to take it as a good suggestion as something that's needed in our community, but not something that should be said ad hoc by these lovely people who are expert at what they told us.
It also, that industry is constantly conglomerating and merging and changing all the time too. So it's a moving target to some extent, or analogy. All right, I think we're about done, unless there's more questions. I have a handout about that GAO report I mentioned, if you're interested in the details of that, on the desk over there, and the co-sponsorship list for all 4 of